Welcome to Just Paw Facts. Today we're looking at a moment every dog owner knows. The second you stand up, your dog does too, following you from room to room, down the hallway, sometimes even when you aren't going anywhere. It's easy to laugh it off or call it clingy, but this quiet habit isn't random at all. It's rooted in instinct, connection, and a long history of dogs learning that moving through the world together was usually the smartest option, especially when there's even a small chance you might be headed toward the kitchen. When your dog stands up the moment you do, when you hear their paws follow yours down the hallway, even though you did not call them or make a sound that mattered to you, it often feels like something so familiar that it barely registers anymore. It becomes background behavior, one of those small, constant details of daily life that you notice just long enough to recognize it before moving on, even though it never actually stops happening. And yet this habit did not begin in your house, nor did it begin as a conscious choice in the way humans think about choice, because long before dogs lived in homes built for comfort rather than survival, they lived in a world where standing up and walking away alone was never neutral. Movement meant information, and sometimes it meant the beginning of something you could not afford to miss, because in a world shaped by risk, distance was something you noticed and responded to immediately. Early dogs did not wander simply because they felt like moving, and they did not separate from their group without reason, because being alone was not peaceful or freeing, it was exposed. Movement happened together by default, not as affection or loyalty, but because staying close was how you remained alive long enough for your instincts to matter, and over time, this way of moving through the world became automatic, woven so deeply into behavior that it no longer required fear or urgency to activate. When dogs began living alongside humans, that ancient pattern did not disappear. It adjusted because humans became the most consistent presence in a dog's environment, the ones who controlled food, shelter, and direction. So when your dog follows you now, they are not making a decision so much as continuing a pattern that has always made sense, one where important beings did not walk away alone, and where moving together was simply how the world worked. Once staying close became the safest assumption, the next question was never whether to follow, but who to follow, because in any group, proximity naturally gathers around the individual whose movement carries the most meaning. In the wild, this was not about affection or preference, it was about function, because certain members of the pack controlled access to food, water, shelter, and direction, and staying near them meant staying near stability itself. Dogs did not need to understand why a leader made certain choices, only that those choices reliably led somewhere worth going, and over time, their instincts became very good at recognizing where resources came from and who decided when it was time to move. When dogs began living alongside humans, that instinct did not disappear. It simply found a new center, because humans became the ones who quietly organized the day and shaped the rhythm of the environment. In your dog's world, you are not just present. You are the one who determines when food appears, when doors open, when walks begin, and when the household shifts from one state to another, which means your movement carries meaning whether you intend it to or not. When you stand up, your dog is not responding to the action itself, but to the possibility that action represents, because historically, movement from the resource holder almost always meant change. This is why dogs do not wait to see if something happens before they follow, because waiting would have been a mistake for most of their history, and so they move first and evaluate later, choosing closeness as the safer default. From your perspective, nothing has changed yet, but from your dog's perspective, something might, and that possibility alone has always been enough to make staying close feel like the right place to be. Once proximity becomes routine and routine becomes expectation, something quieter begins to take shape, because patterns repeated over time do more than organize behavior. They begin to shape how safety itself feels. At this point, following no longer functions only as a strategy. It becomes emotional, not in a dramatic way, but in the way familiarity settles into the body, creating a sense of calm that exists even when nothing is happening at all. Dogs are especially sensitive to this shift because their brains are built to bond deeply, and once a bond forms, it does not remain purely practical. It blends into the same internal space where comfort, predictability, and trust all live together. This is why two dogs in the same home can behave very differently, even when raised the same way, because attachment is not about training or rules. It is about how secure a dog feels when their person is nearby, and that feeling varies from one individual to another. Some dogs follow loosely, staying in the same general area, comfortable enough to nap while keeping one ear tuned to movement, while others follow more closely, room to room, step for step, because proximity itself is what keeps their nervous system settled. Neither pattern is wrong. They are simply different expressions of the same need to stay connected to the presence that feels safest. In dogs with secure attachment, following looks relaxed and unhurried because the dog trusts that the person will return if they leave the room and that nothing essential will be missed with a little distance. While in dogs with more anxious attachment, following feels tighter and more vigilant because closeness is doing more emotional work, helping regulate uncertainty rather than simply maintaining awareness. What matters is not the distance itself, but the role that distance plays in helping the dog feel okay, which is why following often increases during times of illness, stress, or change, when the world feels less predictable and staying close to the most reliable presence becomes more important. This is also why dogs often choose one person to follow most closely, even in a household full of people they love, because attachment tends to form strongest with the individual who provides consistency, emotional steadiness, and calm during moments of uncertainty. That person becomes more than a resource holder. They become a reference point, someone the dog uses to decide whether a sound matters, whether a situation is safe, and whether it is time to relax or stay alert. So when your dog follows you, even when there is nothing to gain and nothing exciting is about to happen, they are not waiting for a reward. They are maintaining emotional alignment, staying close to the presence that keeps their internal world steady. Because at this stage, following is no longer about where you are going. It is about staying connected to the feeling of being safe enough to rest. Once closeness becomes emotional rather than strategic, staying near you begins to serve another quiet purpose, one that does not announce itself as protection, but functions that way all the same. Because in a bonded pair, awareness naturally extends outward. When your dog follows you, they are not only tracking where you are going, they are monitoring what might be happening around you, not consciously or deliberately, but as a continuation of the same instinct that once kept packs alive by noticing changes before they became problems. In the wild, protecting the pack did not mean standing guard in a dramatic sense. It meant staying close enough to respond quickly if something shifted, if a sound changed, if movement appeared where it did not belong. And over time, this attentiveness became less about aggression and more about presence. As dogs adapted to human life, this instinct did not vanish. It softened and redirected, turning outward, not toward open landscapes, but toward doorways, hallways, stairs, and thresholds, the places where movement enters and exits the shared space. This is why dogs often position themselves between you and open areas, why they pause when you pause, why they stop when you stop, and why they sometimes seem to escort you from room to room without any obvious goal. Because escorting is not about guarding territory, it is about staying aligned with the individual who matters most. In a dog's mind, protection does not begin with threat. It begins with proximity, because being close means being able to respond, and being able to respond feels like doing your part, even when nothing happens, and nothing ever needs to. This is also why dogs often follow more closely at night, when visibility drops and the world feels less predictable, and why they sometimes stay nearer when you are sick, tired, or emotionally unsettled, because subtle changes in your behavior register as vulnerability, not in a way that triggers alarm, but in a way that quietly increases attentiveness. From the outside, this can look like guarding, but from the inside, it feels more like accompaniment, a shared movement through space where staying together reduces uncertainty. Because long ago, Being nearby was how you kept the ones you belonged to within reach. By the time the following becomes this smooth and unremarkable, it no longer relies on watching you constantly, because dogs are not actually tracking you the way we tend to imagine, with focused attention or deliberate monitoring. They are doing something far quieter and far more effortless, staying oriented through information that fills the space even when you are not in view. For dogs, sight is only one piece of awareness, and often not the most important one, especially indoors, where sound and scent carry far more meaning than we realize. Every time you move through your home, you leave behind a trail, not in a dramatic sense, but in a layered, ongoing way, a combination of scent, vibration, and familiar sound patterns that never fully disappear. To you, a room resets the moment you leave it, but to your dog, it stays active, holding information about where you were most recently, how fast you were moving, and which direction you went next. Because dogs are so practiced at reading these patterns, they rarely need to search for you at all. They already know where you are. This is why dogs often begin to move before you fully stand up, because your body signals intention long before your feet do, through subtle shifts in posture, breathing, and muscle tension that dogs have learned to associate with movement over thousands of repetitions. Sound works the same way, as your footsteps carry a rhythm your dog recognizes instantly, different from everyone else's, allowing them to follow you through the house without ever appearing alert or tense. What looks like guessing from the outside is actually quiet certainty, built from sensory familiarity. Over time, this awareness becomes so integrated that following no longer feels like an action at all. It feels like orientation, the same way you always know where the ground is without needing to look for it. Because this process requires no effort, dogs can remain relaxed while doing it, which is why following often ends with settling rather than excitement. Your dog is not watching you closely. They are simply staying connected to a trail that never fully fades, moving through your home along paths you cannot see, but they have never stopped noticing. Once a dog can track you without effort, once staying oriented no longer requires focus or alertness, following begins to change in a way that is easy to miss because nothing about the behavior itself looks different, even though something underneath it has quietly shifted. They know where you are now, they know how to find you again, and they do not need to move to stay informed or safe, and yet very often they still do, rising from a comfortable place and trailing behind you, even when experience has taught them that nothing important is likely to happen next. At this stage, following is no longer solving a problem, it is maintaining a feeling, the feeling that things remain steady when you are nearby, and that the world continues to make sense without effort when your presence is within reach. Dogs live in a world shaped by small choices, where to rest, how close is close enough, which direction feels right, and over time those choices begin to reflect not just instinct, but emotional ease, the quiet sense that some places feel better to be in even when all needs are already met, and for many dogs, that place is simply wherever you are. This is why dogs often follow only to lie down again a few feet away, sometimes not even looking at you afterward, because the movement itself was never meant to lead anywhere. It was meant to preserve continuity and keep the internal rhythm of the day intact. They are not seeking stimulation or reward, they are choosing alignment, maintaining proximity, because closeness has become associated with regulation, with the nervous system settling more easily when you are part of the environment rather than somewhere else. This is also why dogs do not follow everyone equally, even people they like, because preference is built quietly through repetition, through moments of calm rather than excitement, through transitions that resolve smoothly rather than loudly. That history accumulates in the body as familiarity. Familiarity becomes comfort, and comfort becomes orientation, until following no longer feels like a decision at all, but a background choice the dog keeps making, simply moving toward the place where things feel right, not because they have to, but because, given the choice, they want to. As alignment becomes familiar and comforting, There are moments when that same closeness begins to carry more weight, not because the behavior itself has changed, but because the reason behind it has. The movement looks the same, the dog rising when you rise and following when you move, but the feeling underneath it grows heavier when the world becomes harder to predict and familiar patterns no longer feel as reliable as they once did. In these moments, following is no longer simply a preference. It becomes a way of holding the world together, because dogs do not experience anxiety as a single emotion, but as uncertainty, as the sense that the environment has become less readable. When that happens, proximity intensifies, not because closeness caused the discomfort, but because closeness has always been the fastest way to restore balance when certainty is missing. This is why following often increases after a change, after a move, a loss, illness, or long periods of disruption. Because when routines shift too quickly, dogs compensate by anchoring themselves more tightly to the presence that still feels predictable. The difference between healthy closeness and anxious closeness often shows not in how closely a dog follows, but in what happens afterward. Whether proximity leads to settling and rest, or to continued monitoring that never quite resolves into calm. Anxious following does not mean the bond is broken. It means the bond is doing more work than usual, and attempts to stop the behavior without addressing the underlying uncertainty often make things worse rather than better. What matters most is not creating distance, but restoring ease, because as certainty returns and the world becomes readable again, closeness naturally lightens, and following softens back into what it was before, a choice rather than a necessity, a preference rather than a strategy for holding everything together. By the time the following reaches this stage, there is very little left to explain, because everything that once made the behavior practical, protective, or necessary has already softened into something quieter. Your dog knows the house, the routines, and the patterns well enough now that distance itself is no longer a problem to solve, and they know nothing important will be missed if they stay where they are, and yet they still move when you do, adjusting their position to remain nearby even when comfort would allow them to stay behind. At this point, following is no longer about anticipation or reassurance. It is about alignment, about staying in rhythm with the presence that has quietly organized their world over time. Through thousands of ordinary moments that never felt important on their own, moments where you moved through the day predictably and calmly, your dog learned where stability lived, not as an idea, but as a feeling that arrived whenever you were close enough to share space without effort. Dogs do not think in terms of importance the way humans do. They think in terms of ease, of which presence makes the environment feel readable and which rhythms feel safe to move alongside. When your dog follows you through the smallest, most unremarkable movements of the day, they are responding to that ease, choosing proximity not because they have to, but because being near you is where their internal world remains steady and complete. So when your dog stands up when you do, settles again a few feet away, or waits quietly just outside the door, what you are seeing is not habit or interruption, but continuity, the natural extension of a bond that never needed to announce itself. They are following because walking through the world still feels better when it happens beside you, not out of need or expectation, but because for them, being near you has simply come to feel like home. By the time you notice your dog following you, it has already been happening for a long time, unfolding through small, ordinary movements that never asked to be explained, only repeated often enough to become part of the shape of your days. They stand when you stand, move when you move, and settle again without asking for anything in return, not because they are watching you closely, but because this shared motion has long since become familiar. Following did not begin as something to notice or correct, and it does not end as a habit to outgrow. It lives in the quiet space where routine turns into trust, and trust turns into something felt rather than understood. Long before modern life softened the edges of survival, staying close meant staying connected, and even now, when nothing requires it, That connection still guides behavior without ever demanding attention. So when your dog follows you through hallways, pauses in doorways, or waits nearby during moments that feel too small to matter, it may help to see it not as clinginess or interruption, but as continuity, the simple agreement that whatever happens next feels easier to face when it happens together. There is no urgency in it and no expectation, only the steady preference to remain within reach of something familiar. And in that preference, expressed quietly through movement rather than words, is something dogs have never needed to explain. They are not following because they have to, and they are not staying close because they are afraid to be alone. They are walking with you because, to them, being near you is where the world continues to feel whole.